So this morning it's a great pleasure to welcome Jean-Yves Dourmad from INRAE in France. Jean-Yves graduated in 1981 from the Agro-Paris in Paris in France, where he got his PhD on nutrition of the reproducing sow. In 1983, he has joined the Institut National de la Recherche Agronomique, which is INRA, which is translated as National Institute of Agricultural Research. It is a French public research institute dedicated to agricultural science. And this is where he has contributed to a research program on energy and protein requirements of sows, and more recently on the evaluation and reproduction of the environmental impact of pig production systems. So to date, Dr. Dourmad has published more than 600 scientific papers as an author or as a co-author. His research is based on both experimental and modeling approaches. He also coordinated the development of the sow module of the INRA pork model and software tool. Dr. Dourmad belongs to the Pig Farming System Research Group of INRA UMR PEGASE unit in Rennes in France, and he chairs the National Transdisciplinary Pig Research Committee of INRA. So welcome, Dr. Dourmad, and if you can start, it's up to you. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mathieu, for the kind introduction and for also inviting me for this presentation. It's nice to travel around the world while being confined at home. So he proposed me to give some information on some data about the effect of high ambient temperature in lactating sows. So we have been working in the past years on these topics, especially with my colleagues David Renaudot and Jean-Luc Gourdin. Perhaps to start, I just give some information about INRA on where we are located. So our research unit is located in west of France, close to Rennes city, in Brittany region. The name of our research unit is UMR PEGASE. In this area, about 70% of the French pig production is located, and it's also about 60% of egg production and about more than 50% of broilers, and 20 to 25% of dairy cows. So it's a very intensive region for animal production. So our research unit is rather big. It's focused only on animal production. We are about 120 permanent staff, including 45 scientists from INRAE and also 14 from faculty members from AgroCampus West, which is the university located close to us in Rennes. On average, we have about 10 to 15 master students and 10 PhD students and postdoc each year. Concerning our research, we are organized in 7 research teams. 2 research teams are rather general. One is focusing on dairy systems, and the second one on swine systems. And I belong to this team working on swine production systems. But we have close connections with the other team working on feeding and nutrition. Two teams are dedicated to the resources used in animal production systems, genetics and genomics, and feeding and nutrition. So with studies on feed evaluation and also on nutritional requirements of pigs. And 3 teams are more focusing on the animal, on lactation. This is mainly on dairy cows, but also to some extent on sows. Adaptation, this means adaptation to the environment and also adaptation to stress, for instance. And the last is working on growth in connection with growth potential, efficiency of use of nutrients, and also meat quality. As illustrated at the bottom of the slide, we are working on different species, 2 dairy species, dairy cows and dairy goats, the pigs, the swine, also to some extent on poultry, especially for studies on nutrition to some extent, and also most of the people working on genetics and genomics are working on poultry. So we come to the presentation. Some context first. So the lactating sow has a low thermoneutral zone because of her high feed intake, which produces a high amount of heat due to the extra heat production, especially, and also to the intensive metabolism due to the high milk production. So this means that the lactating sows are very sensitive to heat stress because of this. Often they are also located in housing in buildings that are heated because of the heat requirement of the piglets. So the animals, and especially the sows, have different mechanisms of adaptation to heat. They can increase the latent heat loss, and this is mainly through respiration in pigs, because pigs are not sweating animals. They have also some behavior adaptation, for instance, lateral lying, watering behavior also in some more natural conditions. They can increase water intake, but most of the time, those adaptations are not sufficient. On sows, reduce their feed intake. This is a way to decrease the heat increment related to the metabolism of energy. And this results in a mobilization of body reserves. And the other mechanism is to reduce milk production. And this is also an efficient way for the sow to reduce the heat production. And this will result in the decrease of piglet weight at weaning. And both of those changes may have adverse effects on performance. For instance, excessive mobilization of body reserves may impair the reproductive performance of sows after weaning, and especially returning to oestrus. And reduction of milk production will result in a decrease in piglets' weight at weaning, on decreased performance after weaning also. And another thing to consider is that due to climate change, it's expected, and I think that we can notice it already in the past years, that there is an increased frequency and intensity of heat stress period. And also we have to consider that most of the pigs in the world are produced under hot climate, tropical or subtropical regions. And this is also main problem for those regions. So when we come to thermoregulation, thermoregulation is a quite good balance between heat production, heat gain, and heat loss. And this is very fine-tuned, controlled by the brain, and it's especially in mammals, where the body temperature remains very constant. So when we look to the different mechanisms that the sow or the animals can use to increase heat loss. At thermoneutrality, we have here the different mechanism illustrated. So the body temperature is about 39 degrees in pigs, and we can see that there are different mechanisms for heat loss. Evaporation is mainly through respiration, convection, conduction to the air, conduction to the floor, and radiation. All those mechanisms explain about 15 to 30% each. In case of heat stress, the situation is completely different. So body temperature will increase, and this is also a mechanism to increase the loss. Body temperature and skin temperature, 36 here, 38 here. But we can see that because the difference between body temperature and ambient temperature is decreased, all those mechanisms, convection, conduction, and radiation, are less efficient, and the animal has to dissipate most of the heat through evaporation. So it's why when sows are in such a situation, you can see them with a high respiratory frequency, respiratory rate. There are also some adaptive behavior. This is illustrated here using thermic cameras in fattening pigs. So on the left, you can see that at thermoneutrality, the pigs are often in external recumbents. You can see that the temperature of the skin is red all over. In situation of heat stress, temperature of the skin increases, especially in the white areas of the skin here, and the behavior changes with lateral recumbency. So there are some adaptation in the behavior, and this is in, I would say, in conventional housing situation. In more natural situation, the sow has another important behavior to face heat stress, is lying in water or in mud when they are raised outdoor. Now, this is very efficient because this will wet the skin and increase the evaporation from the skin. And those mechanisms can also be used in farms, as we can see on the picture here, with watering the sow in the farrowing house. So how can we represent the effect of high temperature on sow performance? So in case of high temperature, I would say above 20, even 22 degrees, there is a decrease in feed intake. This decrease in feed intake results in an increase in body weight mobilization and fat mobilization. This also is associated to a decrease in milk production. Decrease in milk production results in a decrease in liter body weight gain and weaning weight, and also with possible adverse effect on subsequent performance. The increase of mobilization of body weight and fat increase also the risk of reproductive problems after weaning, and all this will contribute to the increase of production cost and the reduction of profitability of the pig farm. But there are also direct effects of temperature on mobilization of body weight and milk production, which are not mediated by feed intake. Increased ambient temperature results in a reduction of milk production, and also it seems many studies have shown this, that increased ambient temperature has a negative effect on body fat mobilization. As we will see on some results later. The main effect of temperature on feed intake is on feed intake, on piglet growth, and this is illustrated here from a study from Nathalie Quignou a few years ago with Jean Oblet. So with the blue line, we have the effect on feed intake, which is curvilinear, which means that above 25 degrees, the effect seems to be more drastic than below. And also the effect on piglets growth, which seemed to start at about 25 degrees in that study, between 22 and 25. So this is associated, this reduction in feed intake is associated with an increase in body weight loss. For instance, here from about 20 kilograms at 20 degrees to about 35 kilograms at 38 degrees. Comparing now animals raised in different regions, this was a work performed by David Renaudot a few years ago. He compared two population of large white sows genetically connected. This means that this was really the same lines, even they were connected. I think they were from the same boars, insemination with the same sires, and they received the same diet and the same animal management in two different situations in France, in temperate regions of France, and in the West Indies, in Guadeloupe. And so there were about 50 sows in each treatment. We can see that feed intake in tropical conditions is reduced by about 22% with the same genotypes. Body weight loss is increased by about 46%, and litter body weight at weaning is decreased by 20%. Just showing this interaction between or this quite drastic effect of the conditions, of the thermal conditions or the climate more generally on performance, because not only the temperature was changing, but also the humidity of the air. Different studies showing the direct effects of heat stress on milk production, on body weight loss. This has been obtained and shown using pair feeding. So in the first study was a study from Mesa de Braganza and Prunier in primiparous sows. So fed at 20 degrees or at 30 degrees, and they were fed pair fed. So this means that the sows at 20 degrees were restricted fed and were received about the same amount. It was supposed to be exactly the same, but a small difference, as the sows fed ad libitum at 30 degrees. So feed intake is the same. And the same in the second study on multiparous sows, on the study from Renaudot. Body weight loss was much higher at 20 degrees than at 30 degrees with the same feeding level. And this was the case also for multiparous sows. This shows that there is a direct effect on the capacity of temperature, on the capacity of the sow to mobilize body reserves. And also litter body weight gain was decreased in both situations. So effect of heat stress on performance are not all explained by the reduction of feed intake. And there is a direct effect of heat stress on the limitation of milk production. In fact, we have shown with David, by measuring the mammary blood flow, in fact, it seems that heat increases mammary gland blood flow, but this flow is dedicated to the skin of the mammary gland. and at the same time there is a decrease of nutrient uptake. This was quite surprising because we expected that temperature would decrease the blood flow to the mammary gland, but it was not the case. And in fact, the mammary gland is a very efficient gland to dissipate heat. So it's why the flow to the mammary gland is increased, but the nutrient uptake was decreased, so which was consistent with the decrease in milk production. And there is also a direct effect of heat stress on the limitation of mobilization of body reserve, and especially of body fat. And this is also known in dairy cows, for instance. Another point to consider is that the effect of temperature is not the same when we have a constant temperature on a fluctuating temperature. And this is clearly shown in that study, either at 25 degrees or 29 degrees with a constant temperature or a fluctuating temperature. And you can see that with the fluctuating temperature, feed intake is higher, 4.97, 5.3 on 3 and 3.9. Body weight loss is lower, and little body weight gain is higher. This means that sows are able to compensate the effect of heat stress by increasing the feed intake during the coolest period of the day. And the consequence in practice that it's very important to feed the sow during this period. This means that especially during the very early in the morning or during the night when the temperature is lower. So in this context, we planned a study to try to better quantify the effect of heat stress in lactating sows. So the objective was to quantify the physiological and performance response of lactating sows and their litter to ambient temperature, and to integrate this response in decision-making tools for sow nutrition, and especially in our decision-making tool, which is INRA. So the approach is that we perform a meta-analysis of the literature in order to incorporate the prediction equation we obtained from this analysis in models for modeling the effect of temperature on sow on litter performance. And then we simulated the effect of different climatic series on sow performance and nutritional requirements. And this has been published in the French Swine Days, and we are preparing a publication for an international journal from this study. So the meta-analysis, we selected 46 publications between 80 and 2013, even 15 now we added some. We collected the data, and then we made a statistical analysis on those data. It's quite a classical approach. So for the statistical analysis, we used a mixed model. On the main criteria that we evaluated were feed intake, respiratory frequency, rectal temperature, body weight loss, back fat loss, and litter growth rate, even piglets growth rate also. So in this model, we had fixed effect of temperature, either linear or quadratic, effect of parity, and we have random effects of publication on the interaction between publication and temperature. So we have here the models that we used. It's quite classical for such studies. So just to show the variability of the results we had in that database, for feed intake, we had about 200 treatments where we combine the treatments and the publications. And this was from 38 publications. On average, feed intake was 4.77 kilograms per day, and with a standard error of 1.2 kilograms per day. And the average temperature in the database was about 25 degrees. And you have here the different lines representing the different results from the different studies. So from this, we can extract a tendency or prediction equation. And this was the equation we obtained. We also obtained a curvilinear relationship, but which was not very different from the linear. From this, we can represent the relative response of the different criteria to ambient temperature. So the average was 25. This is the response as a percentage for feed intake. So at 32 degrees, we have about 25% reduction of feed intake compared to 25. And on the opposite, we have about 25% increase at 17 degrees Celsius. It's interesting to note that when temperature decreases, even below what is usual in farrowing houses, there is still an increase in feed intake. So this means that ambient temperature, even between 20-22 degrees, is already affecting feed intake. The effect on respiratory frequency. So this effect is very important. There is almost 100% increase in respiratory frequency between 25 degrees and 32 degrees. And this is the main adaptation mechanism for the sow to face heat stress. And as we have seen before, in heat stress situation, more than 60% of the heat is lost through respiration. The effect on litter gain, so is slightly less than the effect on feed intake, showing that there are some adaptation mechanisms to compensate for this lower feed intake. And this is mainly the increase in weight loss and the increase in back fat loss. All is expressed as a percentage. And at the end, you can see that rectal temperature, body temperature remains quite constant. The increase is significant, but it's about 1 degree, which is quite a lot already. But I have not the data here. But when we look at the body temperature of the sow along the day, there's some period, especially when the sow has been eating, body temperature is quite often above 41 degrees, so very close to a critical situation. And this explains why in heat stress situation, especially when you have periods of very short-term heat stress, when the sow has not the capacity to adapt to that heat stress, there is an increased risk of mortality. And it is quite common to see in some countries during summer. After a period of heat stress, mortality rate of sows increases. And it's just because they are not able to face this very important increase of heat, of that difficulty to dissipate heat. And in that situation, it would even be recommended to restrict the sows, because they are not able to adapt, and you have a very high temperature. So it's better not to feed them too much to reduce the risk of extremely high body temperature on mortality. And this is a point that it has not been discussed a lot in the literature, but adaptation of the feeding practice to heat stress can also be to restrict in order to avoid this risk when you know that because of you know that in the next days the weather will be very hot, try perhaps not to feed too much. So we use those equations. So there is a set of equations in models. So first, I will not present this. We develop a model to predict the effect of climate on the temperature perceived by the sow. We connected this model to the modeling nutritional model of lactating sows. It was based mainly on our INRA model in combination with the results from the meta-analysis. And then we used this model for performing simulation for sensitivity analysis. And we used, in fact, in that study, two locations. Toulouse, this is in south of France, and Rennes in west of France. So it's weather is warmer in Toulouse than in Rennes. Two periods, 2000 and 2045. And 2045 was predicted from the expected effect of climate change on temperature. There are already some climatic series available for 2045, and we performed the simulation on primiparous and multiparous sows. First, the model construction. So it's based mainly for the nutrition model on INRA. So we have here as input feed intake and feed composition. We represent standardized ileal digestible amino acids on metabolizable energy. The nutrients, energy, and amino acids are used for body protein deposition, but this occurs mainly during gestation, body lipid deposition. And energy is lost as heat increment. So this is the ratio between net energy and metabolizable energy, and maintenance, which is also lost as energy. And from this, we can predict heat production. So the nutrients are used for milk energy and milk protein, and also body protein and body lipids are used to face nutritional deficits and to provide energy on amino acids for milk synthesis. So this is the INRA model, and this INRA model is able to predict body weight on composition also. So we connected this model to a model representing the housing. In this model, we had access to outdoor temperature from climatic series, and we predicted the indoor temperature using the outdoor temperature on the heat production, which was related to especially to feed intake. So in that situation, it was possible to make the connection between climatic series and indoor temperature, with some assumption on the housing, the design of the housing, etc. But this works quite well. In fact, it's a bioclimatic model, which is connected to the nutritional model. So using this model, we first perform sensitivity analysis to ambient temperature. And this is illustrated here. We started at 22 degrees. It's expressed in percentage. It's more easy to show. This is the reference, which is close to what is the most common in terms of temperature in farrowing houses. So first, we can see the effect on ME intake. Here we use the linear relationship. When temperature increases, feed intake decreases. by up to 50% for the 33 degrees, I think. This resulted in an increase in the energy deficit, which increased by about 40%. ME requirement, total ME requirement decreased because of the decrease in ME for milk. Well, we can see that most of the DME with the variation of total ME requirement on ME for milk is about very similar because of the main contribution of milk to the energy requirement by about 15% for both. And also we calculated the requirement in SCD lysine per kilogram of feed or per gram of feed, and we have an increase by about 30%. Just showing that the increase of temperature has many nutritional consequences. So the first are that intake is decreased, and so this results in an energy deficit. Concerning protein and amino acids, it's easier to compensate because we can increase the content in the feed. And this model is able to predict the variation of the content we have to adapt in order to face this decrease of feed intake. So we did the same using climatic series for, I just give here the result for Toulouse. So we have for 2000 the full line, and for 2045 with dotted lines. So value for 2045 are predicted according to the expected climate change. And here we have for each month in the year the predicted feed intake for multiparous sows in red and primiparous sows in blue. And this is simulated for farrowing houses without, I would say, conventional farrowing houses. What we predict is that there is a quite drastic decrease of feed intake during summer periods, especially July, August, September, as well for multiparous sows and for primiparous sows. Even the extent of the difference is higher for multiparous sows, but in percentage it's about the same. What we can see also is that there is a significant effect of the year. That this means that according to those simulations, the climate change will have a significant effect on feed intake, at least if we don't change the housing design, with a reduction of feed intake, and especially during autumn here in that situation. To some extent here also in June. So a longer period with a decreased feed intake. Not so much for July. This is the effect on average litter growth. So what is quite classical, that litter growth is higher in multiparous sows compared to primiparous sows, and there is a significant effect of parity on year again, though again climate change may have a quite significant effect, should have a quite significant effect on performance. Assuming at least that the prolific acid remains the same. There was also a significant effect of location. So the effect was more pronounced in south of France compared to north of France, because climate is more temperate in Brittany. So we come now to the effect on digestible lysine requirement for primiparous sows and multiparous sows. We first observed that there is a quite important effect of parity on requirement expressed per kilogram of feed, with a higher requirement for primiparous sows compared to multiparous sows, but this is quite classical. We also evaluated the quite important effect of the period in the year, the months of the year or the season on this requirement. So during summer period, the content or the concentration in amino acid has to be increased to compensate for the lower feed intake. And again, we have a significant effect of year when you compare 2000 and 2045, showing that there's some effect of the climate change, but this effect of the climate change is less than the effect of the season, in fact. Showing that perhaps at short term, it's what is more important is to adapt to this season effect, to adapt the diet to this season effect. And when looking to this graph, it's quite clear that requirements of sows depends on the season, depends on parity, and feeding the same feed to all sows is perhaps not the best situation. It's a compromise between what is possible technically and what should be done. Perhaps for the future, things will change because of the development of new technologies, new smart feeders that will be able to for instance, to mix two diets and feed and adapt the composition of the feed according to the season, but even according to the performance of each sow. So we come to the conclusion. This study from the meta-analysis has shown that there are many adaptation mechanisms to heat stress. The main one is increase in respiratory frequency, and this is to increase latent heat loss. Second main mechanism is the decrease in feed intake, and this is to decrease heat production. Decrease in meal production, also mechanism that allows to decrease heat production. And there are also some behavior adaptations that increase heat loss through conduction. For instance, lateral lying increases the contact between the skin and the floor. Access to water is important. Wetting the skin, for instance, is a very efficient mechanism to increase latent heat loss in pigs. Modeling the effects of ambient temperatures on sows and piglet performance on nutritional requirements. So the equation we have obtained in combination with modeling nutritional models, and I would say also with a bioclimatic model, allows to better take into account the effect of temperature on performance on nutritional requirements. So the perspectives is to integrate those equations in rapport decision support tools, because the effect of temperature is not yet considered for lactating sows. In practice, those results show that perhaps it could be of interest to adapt feed composition according to season and localization of farms. And I think some companies are already doing this. For instance, they can propose different lactation diets according to seasons or according to the localization of the farm. And for the future, precision feeding of lactating sows, for instance, the mixing of 2 feeds, could be a very efficient way to adapt to those heat stress period, and also to better take into account the variability of requirement among sows. And we are working quite a lot on this topic now. We have a PhD thesis working on precision feeding of lactating sows using those technologies. So practical methods for improving sow performance under heat stress. So housing and equipment are still of main interest. First, reduction of thermal heat load, reduce air temperature by fogging or pad cooling. Separate temperature regulation of piglets' nest and ambient temperature. This has been proven to be very efficient. It's quite simple. The technologies are available, but it's still quite common that the room temperature is regulated according to the nest temperature, and this results in a quite high room temperature that is required for the piglets, but which is excessive for the sows. And this is illustrated here on the picture here. Cooling of drinking water. This has been, it's quite also not very difficult. I think it's not implemented at farm, but just cooling the drinking water is a quite efficient way to decrease the heat load in the sow. And this is illustrated in the picture here. Or watering the sows in order to increase the sow heat loss, especially the evaporative heat loss during drip and spray cooling, or sensible heat loss using ventilation, localized snout cooling, floor cooling also. All those technologies have been shown to be efficient, but are not so easy to implement in pig farm, especially in existing farrowing houses. But for new houses, I think it's of interest of thinking about all those technologies. Coming back to the feed now, feed composition. Some studies have also shown that it's possible to reduce heat increment of the lactating diet by increasing the ratio between net energy and metabolizable energy. This means less protein and more synthetic amino acids, more fat, more starch also. So this has been shown to have some efficiency, but the extent of the efficiency remains quite limited. Another recommendation is to adapt nutrient concentration to compensate for the reduced feed intake. And this can be for amino acid, mineral, but also for vitamins or other nutrients. And this is possible because feed intake is mainly regulated as regard to energy, not to those nutrients. Increase some specific micronutrient supplies with requirements could be increased in situation of heat stress. For instance, there are some studies showing that it could be interesting to adapt the electrolytic balance, which is altered due to hyperventilation. So when you have hyperventilation, you increase the loss of carbon dioxide, and this will affect the pH, the blood pH. Vitamin needs for coping for increased oxidative stress also, for instance. Feeding techniques, so more applied technologies. Feed the sows during the coolest period of the day, and also this is possible to achieve now with the new feeding technologies with feeders connected to computers. It's possible to program the periods of feeding. Precision feeding to adapt feed composition to temperature. This is also a new area which is possible now to the development of smart feeders. It's is not common in big farms yet, but some technologies already allows for this, perhaps more during gestation than during lactation. And also, I've been speaking a lot of sows because I'm more working on sows, but don't forget the piglets. In fact, the piglets are not so sensitive to heat stress because the thermoneutral zone is much higher than the thermoneutral zone of the lactating sow. So, in fact, we cannot consider that even at 30 degrees, they have to face the heat stress, the piglet, but they have to face a nutritional deficit due to the decrease in milk production. So give a high priority to the feeding of piglets to compensate for the decreased milk production. And they have the capacity to adapt. Some studies have shown, for instance, that in situation of heat stress, the consumption of creep feed is increased, and this will partially compensate for the decreased milk production. So give a high priority to a feeding of piglets, and it's all those practices to increase the feeding level of piglets, the feed intake of piglets, and which is also not so easy, but are quite some knowledge about those technologies. And especially it's very important to increase the feed consumption of creep feed consumption of piglets to come back closer to the natural behavior. In fact, the piglets, the sows, the sows learn the piglets to eat. So if you put the creep feed close to the tail of the sow, it's not a good way for the sow to learn the piglet to eat. It's better to have the creep feed very close to the feeder of the sows. And there has been many studies showing that this learning behavior is very important to increase the feed intake of piglets. So thank you for your attention. We have some time, I think, for questions if you have.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. Very, very informative presentation and a lot of ideas and a lot of questions actually are coming already. So I'm going to try to ask all of them. The first question I received is, do you think that using a ventilation curve in the farrowing house in order to reduce the temperature during the lactation period, so to adapt the temperature during lactation period, could have an impact on the feed intake?
Yes, I think it's increasing ventilation rate can be a way to dissipate more heat from the farrowing house. But there are some limitations because in situation of heat stress, often the outdoor temperature is about the same or sometimes higher than in indoor temperature. So increasing ventilation by increasing the flow of air from outside to inside, or increasing the flow of air through the building, may be not efficient, because you increase the heat entering the farrowing house. So it's better in that situation to have a fan ventilation within the farrowing house. I think this exists in some countries, not so much in temperate countries, but in more tropical countries, to have ventilation. Often they have also more open buildings, but to have ventilation within the farrowing room, in order to increase the airspeed on the skin of the sow, to increase the conduction losses. So it can be efficient, yes, but there are some limitations. And in some situations, I think it's efficient, but perhaps not sufficient in some situations.
Okay, thank you. There was a question, but you more or less you have touched that subject. The question was about micronutrients, minerals and vitamins, but that was just before you showed that slide about this subject. I don't know if you want to add a little bit about minerals and vitamins, and also electrolyte balance. Can you explain a bit more? So
concerning minerals, in fact, I've presented here the effect of season on parity on digestible lysine requirement, but you have exactly the same on phosphorus requirement. During summer, the phosphorus requirement per kilogram feed increases because of the decreased feed intake. And so we have the same. For micronutrients, it can be slightly different because you may have some specific requirements due to facing heat stress, especially the oxidative stress which is associated with heat stress. Concerning the electrolyte balance, in fact, what happens when the sow has to face heat stress? So we have seen that the main mechanism is to increase the respiratory frequency. And when increasing this respiratory frequency, you have more oxygen consumed and more carbon dioxide, which is released through respiration. And carbon dioxide in the blood is a very important mechanism for buffering the pH of blood. So when the sow face heat stress, because of this release of CO2, there is some alkalosis, risk of alkalosis. And to face this risk of alkalosis, there are many mechanisms that will adapt to maintain the blood pH. So surprisingly, it has been shown that providing bicarbonate can be efficient in such situation, because when you provide bicarbonate, you provide CO2 also to the animal. So I have not the expertise on these topics, but it has been shown for sows, for instance, that in period of heat stress, providing bicarbonate can be of interest.
Okay.
But it's a very complex question.
Okay. There is one question about the model that you have presented, and somebody was asking if you use in this model summer and winter feed for the lactation, or is it the same feed nutrients, or?
In the model, in fact, when we use the model, we use the model just to predict the requirements. We simulate also, but it was, yes, we used I don't remember. It was when we made the sensitivity analysis, we used the same diet for winter and summer for the different temperature. This was to evaluate the sensitivity of the different criteria to temperature. When we simulated the effect of season, in fact, we just calculated the requirements. We did not simulate the variation in body composition. So it was just a calculation of the requirement. For this, we do not have to describe the whole composition of the feed, in fact. So okay. We predict the feed consumption, we predict the milk production, and from the milk production, on other criteria such as body weight of sows, we can predict the amino acid requirement for milk production, amino acid requirement for maintenance, and we come at the end with an amino acid requirement in gram per day, and then we divide this by the amount of feed consumed in order to have the requirement per kilogram feed. And it's why we have this fluctuation of lysine requirement according to season results in fact from the reduction of feed intake during summer and the reduction of milk production during summer. But because the extent of the reduction of feed intake is more pronounced than the reduction in milk production, the ratio increases.
Okay, thank you. You've been talking about the milk production, and do you have information about colostrum production during its stress period?
No, I have not. Colostrum production is a different mechanism from milk production. For instance, colostrum production is not affected by litter size, whereas milk production is affected by litter size. So when you have an increase in litter size, you have an increase in milk production. That on total milk production, there is a decrease in milk production per piglets, but total milk production increases. This is not the case for colostrum. In fact, the sow is producing a given amount of colostrum, and if you have more piglets, we'll have much less colostrum per piglet available. So the mechanism is quite different but I don't remember about this question of the effect of heat stress on colostrum.
Okay.
I've not seen papers on this in the literature, but perhaps there is also.
Yep. We have some question about the water. So the first question is about liquid intake, so water intake. Does it drive the feed intake? And the second question is, do you think the liquid feeding can make a difference compared to dry feeding when you have high temperature?
In fact, if you don't provide water enough, the sow will decrease feed intake. But if you give more water, this will not increase feed intake also. So in fact, when you provide a sufficient amount of water, you need a sufficient amount of water in connection with the feed which is consumed. And especially for lactating sows, because there is a flow of water due to the milk production, which is quite important. Concerning the liquid feeding and dry feeding, in fact, when the temperature increases, spontaneous feed intake decreases, but water requirement increases classically. Water consumption. This means that the ratio at the end, the ratio between water consumed to feed consumed drastically increase in situation of heat stress. Even if we go to the extreme situation, the sow will continue to drink a great amount of water and stop eating. So this means that this ratio between water on feed intake is very different according to temperature. So it's why I think if you have wet feeding, you have to have water available free in order that the sow is able to dissociate between the feed intake and the water intake. So for me, it's impossible to give the sow the optimal ratio between water on feed. Well, it's very complicated at least to predict this ratio. I don't know if I answered the question. Another question also in liquid feeding is that in situation of high ambient temperature, it's also more difficult to have with liquid feeding to have clean troughs. So the risk of fermentation is higher. So this is also, on a practical point of view, it's also very important to consider. To be able to have a clean trough on fresh feed, so many times per day with the liquid feeding. But it's possible. Another question?
Yes, I have a lot. So we have some questions coming from Southeast Asia. So they didn't wait for climate change to have the warm weather. And it's now over there, it is already 34 degrees Celsius. And with their ventilation system, they are able to reduce the temperature maybe down to 28 degrees, but it's difficult to go lower. So the question is, do you have any information about the what we can achieve in terms of feed consumption for the farrowing sows in this tropical climate? According to that person, 5 kilo is already very difficult to achieve. So I don't know what is your experience.
Yes, it's what we have seen in the study from Renaudot, where they compare the same genotypes in tropical conditions in the West Indies and in temperate conditions in France. So I think it was about they were eating less than 5 kilograms per day in those conditions. So I think it's possible to try to compensate for nutrient supplies by increasing to some extent the nutrient content of diets, but the question will still be there for energy. So also possible to adapt energy content of the diet by having by increasing the net energy content for the same ME content. This has been shown to have also some possible impacts, but in such situation, I think that adapting the housing is also a major approach. Cooling the water, for instance, the drinking water is efficient. It's not so expensive to do. Instead of giving drinking water at 35 degrees, you give it at 20 or 15 degrees. It makes a big difference, in fact, in terms of feed intake. Cooling the floor, but this is more expensive, and you need more adaptation. The question is also, another approach could also to better adapt the sows through genetic selection. Some selection companies that already are doing this, trying to select sows or sow lines according to their capacity to adapt to warm conditions. I think there's some room for this. A question at the end will be that when we have very highly prolific sows, in fact, those highly prolific sows, they produce more heat because they produce more milk. So we have also to consider that increasing prolificacy makes the problems more complicated to solve, because a sow with more piglets produce more milk and produce more heat. So the sow will have more difficulties to adapt to heat stress. So perhaps the optimum in terms of prolificacy could be different. I don't know. This can be an economic balance to find. As regard to the productivity, as regard to the risk of mortality of sows, which is an economic problem, but it's also a social problems, because some society now is especially in some countries, do not accept so high mortality of sows as we have in some farms, more than 20% at the end, or so it's 20% of the sows die before going out of the farm. Sometimes it's more. So there is an optimum to find between the capacity of the sow to adapt on the performance. On this optimum may differ according to the climate, for instance. Right? It's more general concern in terms of acceptability of pig production systems.
Okay, I have another question which is coming from another type of climate. So it's coming from the UK, and you know that in the UK they have about 40 or 50% of the sows which are raised outdoors. And so the question is, what would be the main differences when we compare the feed composition between indoor, so control environment, and outdoor sows in concordance with the heat stress, of course?
In fact, often in outdoor sows, if the sow has access to a water puddle or mud puddle, they are able to adapt quite well to temperature. So I think it's perhaps less a problem in outdoor sows during summer. A problem that they could have is the risk related to the sun. Some sows are sensitive to the sun, so they need some shelter also to protect from the sun in summer. But surprisingly, in outdoor condition, in fact, often temperature, you have a much larger variation of temperature along the day between the night and the day. So the sow is able to eat more in such conditions than in indoor conditions. So I think that the situation is not so complicated for outdoor compared to indoor as regard to heat stress. If they can protect from the sun, and if they have access to water puddles, they will adapt, as I have shown on my last slide.
Okay.
Okay. I would say, especially in UK, because you have the climate is perhaps quite similar to what we have in Britain. So we have some heat stress period, but not so long. But they occur. So I think that to adapt the feed composition in such conditions, what you need is information about the litter growth in such condition. How is the litter growth changing along the year, and also about the feed intake of sows. But if you have those two information from real farms, you can quite easily evaluate the requirement in terms of nutrient per kilogram of diet.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question. So INRA is in France, and you share a lot of information with the French feed companies, I suppose. And the question is there French feed companies which are adjusting the lysine requirement month by month, or adapting the diet to take into account of this heat stress, or how
I think
often they would change?
I think some companies are doing, or some companies are not proposing the same, exactly the same diets according to the regions, different regions of France. And also, often companies, they have, for instance, for the lactation diet, they have different types of lactation diets, more or less concentrated. So they can propose some diversity in terms of diet. So the farmer then can adapt and choose perhaps during summer a more concentrated diet than during winter. But I have no real figures on this.
Okay. Somebody is asking a very specific question. I don't know if they want to produce a new type of energy, because they are asking me, do you have information on the average production of heat per sow in watts?
Sorry, of?
The production of heat by the sow, so the heat,
Yes.
how do you say? In watt, how many watt is it? I don't know if they want to collect the energy and
okay.
and warm the house with it.
Oh yes, it's just a question of calculation. In fact, you can. I have not the data in mind, but when we develop our model, for instance, if I come back here, you can see the slide.
Yes, we can see it.
So on the slide on the bottom left, it's just a description of the model we developed. So we have in the blue is the amount of heat in the farrowing house, in fact. Then we have the production of sensible heat by the sow. This is connected to the heat production of sow. We have production of heat due heating, chauffage here in French. Then we have losses through the walls, the ceiling, on the floor, and losses through ventilation. And then we have a regulation of ventilation according to a minimum, a maximum, and a variation. So this model, so we can connect the heat production by the sow by heating. So in the same way as heating is expressed in watts, so in kilowatt or we can express it the same for animals. I think a fattening peak is equivalent to about 100 watt, about 100 watt. So sow is more. So it's a quite important production. It just you have just to go back to your physics courses and just make the you have to transform the the heat production will be in joules, and then the joules are transferred in watt according to put the joules per second. I think joules per second is something close to a watt.
Okay, thank you.
So it's possible. It's possible, yes.
You touch a little bit about reproduction, so the impact of heat stress on reproduction, and I would like to know if it's a boar problem, a sow problem, or both, or which one is most important.
I think it can be both problems. Concerning the sow, in fact, what has been shown is that there is an effect of season on reproduction. And this effect of season is partly related to an effect of temperature and partly to an effect of light, duration of the day. So both can be involved, but it's mainly the effect of temperature. On this effect of temperature, we assume that it's mainly been mediated through the effect on mobilization of body reserves. We know that sows that experience an excessive mobilization of body reserves have a higher risk of returning later into estrus or with delayed return into estrus. So this is first point. And it has been shown that, in fact, it seems that it's mainly the deficit of energy during the first the beginning of lactation that seem to have the major effect. But we have done a study with David Renaudot in order to try to connect the reproductive performance to the climate or the temperature. In fact, we used the data from the French database with reproductive performance, and we located the farms, and we associated those farms to climatic series close to those farms. So just about, it was about 20 to 50 kilometers from the farm, and we tried to make a connection between the temperature, outdoor temperature, and the success of conception, for instance, or the polyefficacy. I have not all the results in mind, but I remember that, for instance, the success in conception after insemination was related or was negatively correlated with the temperature during the first week of lactation. When sows experienced a high temperature during the first week of lactation, there was a higher risk of non-conception after weaning. So it seems that there are correlations, there are relationships between climate and reproduction that are quite well known. The mechanisms are not completely elucidated yet. And there is also an effect of Bohr, and it's known that, for instance, the concentration of semen may be affected by season, by temperature, with a delay, also a delay of about 20 days. But often now we are using artificial insemination, and Bohr are raised in rooms where the temperature is controlled, even with techniques to maintain the temperature quite cool for cooling. So another point is the transport of the semen, and that could be affected. So when you have reproductive troubles in a farm, you have to consider both the problems that could come from the semen and come from the sows. I don't know if I answered.
You did answer very well, thank you. I don't have any more questions at the moment, so I think we are going to finish here. So I would like to thank you very much for giving us this very informative presentation. Thanks a lot, Jean-Yves. It was great to have you with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you also. You can give the participant my email. I'm not sure I have given it.
Okay,
if they want
I will share it.
For more questions.
I will share it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Alors, see
Thank
you all. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.